Systema is a Russian martial art that was originally used and developed by the KGB during the Soviet era. Although it was secretive for many years, it has now spread into becoming a mainstream martial art. Due to its relatively young age, there's still a lot of confusion when it comes to Systema, which also doesn't help, due to Systema having a fairly fluid and flexible system. As a result, many people often ask the question of whether Systema is a legitimate martial art or not. We shall now give an honest opinion of whether Systema really works, or whether it's pure bullshido. Systema can be nonsense, and sometimes suffers from the pitfalls of Krav Maga. Having said that, it doesn't mean that Systema isn't legitimate. This will take a bit of explaining. As you can imagine, any martial art performed by KGB agents is going to be realistic, as it also includes Sambo. It's literally a matter of life and death in certain combat scenarios, so it makes sense that the KGB would learn an efficient martial art. As mentioned, Krav Maga has suffered a similar fate. There are definitely legitimate Krav Maga schools out there, but sadly there are also ones that teach unrealistic moves without experience. As Krav Maga's popularity has spread, its quality of techniques have dipped, as its original moves have been lessened and watered down. Arguably, a similar thing has happened with Systema, which actually teaches a similar curriculum at times. To answer the original question, Systema, in its original purest form, is not nonsense. However, if we're talking about strip mall Systema, then sadly it's ineffective. So, when is Systema effective? If you can find a teacher with a genuine KGB background, then there's no doubt this will be legitimate. If not, then you're taking a potential gamble. That's not to say there are not legitimate teachers who aren't Russian. Instead, it's saying they're more likely to be further from the original source. For example, Systema teaches a lot of realistic moves that would genuinely work in a street fight. These moves include throws, submissions, and certain striking methods. In this sense, Systema does have a lot of close ties with Krav Maga, and it's not surprising they were both made for military use. Furthermore, if performed correctly, then Systema will turn you into an athlete, which is a big advantage when fighting. It's a stereotype that Russians are strong and fit, but this is no coincidence. True Systema will also teach you how to move correctly, as well as strengthen and condition your body. Although directly not linked to fighting, these are great habits and can go a long way in combat. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as a bad martial art, just bad teaching, and this fits Systema's criticisms well. One issue with Systema is that it teaches how to defend against knife attacks. Of course, there is skill and technique to learning knife defense, like there is for everything in life. The issue is these techniques can never be taught under a truly pressured environment, such as boxing sparring. In other words, the reality of life cannot be replicated by drills, or even sparring with plastic knives for that matter. This is where Systema can become questionable. Of course it's going to be good if it's taught by a legitimate Russian instructor who was close to the source. However, what happens when someone teaches bad moves and there's no way of pressure testing them? This is one of the pitfalls of training moves that are literally too dangerous to use in sparring. The result of this is that you need to trust your instructor completely, which is fine if they're legitimate, but otherwise terrible. Having said this, these critiques are also applicable to other martial arts such as Hapkido, Kali, Krav Maga, and other disciplines that regularly train with weapons. Undoubtedly, a lot of the Systema breathing techniques are legitimate. As performed by Hicks and Gracie, one of the greatest MMA fighters of his era, there's a lot to be said about breathing correctly. The idea of this is that you won't panic and breathe too quickly, which would effectively shut your body down. Instead, by breathing as efficiently as possible, your body can respond to danger, both physically and mentally. Again, there's definitely something to the Systema breathing methods, and in this sense, the art was years ahead of its time. However, once again, it falls for the same criticism. This is that people are teaching the original techniques in a harmful way. Sometimes bad teachers will overemphasize the spiritual side and breathwork of Systema. Obviously, optimal breathing has proven important when fighting, as it's good to learn, but sometimes Systema can delve into the mystical side of breathing too much when it should instead focus on the basics, and remember, it's about self-defense more than it is yoga. One idea of Systema is that your body needs to be loose to fight properly. Again, this isn't necessarily wrong, and you don't want to be stiff during combat. However, some schools take this too far and force students into borderline Bushido techniques that are meant to loosen the body. For instance, some parts of Systema almost end up in Aikido territory when it comes to using your body. One example of this is supposedly being so loose that when your opponent goes to strike you, they end up missing you and you use their momentum to engage in a counter-attack. There may be some reality to this, but it's also very unrealistic at times. During a demo, you may see someone lunge with a punch, which is dodged and countered with a wrist lock. This is potentially possible, but in a real-life scenario, will obviously be difficult and very rare to pull off. With this in mind, it brings up questions about whether Systema is genuinely good at its original design, which was to provide realistic self-defense classes. Final thoughts on Systema. Overall, it's fair to say that judging Systema is not easy. On the one hand, it's definitely got some effective fighting methods that are useful in street fighting and self-defense. On the other hand, it also falls into some pitfalls of other martial arts as being too mystical and unrealistic. As you may have gathered, in theory, there's nothing wrong with Systema. However, the practical side of things is that certain people are teaching certain techniques that simply don't work under the guise of Systema in order to make money. In other words, if you're going to begin training Russian Systema, make 100% sure it's a legitimate teacher.